Hello and welcome to this week's What Were They Thinking? We begin with news about the CCP virus and the request from Eli Lilly, a large American pharmaceutical company, for emergency authorization for a new treatment. They're seeking approval to be able to use what is known as a antibody treatment. That is, small markers that go in, attach themselves to the pathogen, in this case either infected cells or the virus itself, and identify them for the immune system to then destroy. The approval's been sought after the research team has spent the better part of the last 7 months trying to refine it. It involves 2 processes, or at least 2 treatment options. One is a monotherapy, that being a single antibody. The other is a dual antibody treatment. That means they can either use one, the other, or prospectively both. The emergency authorization is currently being sought for the monotherapy and likely will be later requested for the dual therapy as well. This is based on safety data. The initial results weren't entirely encouraging, but after further exploration and clinical trials, it's been shown to work effectively, and that any concerns that were held have proven unwarranted. The advantages of the antibody therapy are that it is, at least in relative terms, far easier to manufacture. In terms of what we're talking about with vaccine rates, they can achieve what vaccine companies can't. Eli Lilly says they would hope to have 100,000 doses available by the end of the month and over 1 million by the end of the year. This far exceeds the anticipated capacity to produce vaccines, where it's thought that similar rates wouldn't be possible until well into next year. That is for the monotherapy. The dual combination therapy may only have half the capacity, and Eli Lilly says that they'd have 50,000 doses of that by the end of this year. Significantly lower, but also significantly harder to make. The recent news of President Trump being given a similar treatment is by another company, but with the same fundamental underlying idea. These treatments may be very important before long, with the concerning news we've reported recently about a Kawasaki-like disease, which is known as multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, is now showing up in adults, where it has been rather imaginatively named multi-system inflammatory syndrome in adults. Yes, creative naming that's going to be quite memorable. Memorable or not, the implications of this are significant. We've continued to reinforce the concern that even if more people are not dying, or at least people are not dying at the same rate as they were early in the outbreak, we're still seeing the infections occurring, and where we may not be seeing death immediately, we are seeing an increase in morbidity. This increase in morbidity could have more serious long-term ramifications than the acute increase in mortality. Consider what's going to happen if a large swathe of the population develops chronic diseases that did not have before they were hit by the CCP virus. In children, this is one thing, where, at least temporarily, the issues are going to be stayed by the simple fact that they are children supported by their parents. When we now see the same sort of condition in adults, we're losing a large part of the active adult working population. Most of these cases have been reported in America and at least one in the United Kingdom. Of the 16 cases that are known, they went in people from the age of 21 years to 50 years. This again highlights how much of an issue even relatively asymptomatic or low symptomatic cases can be when they affect such a wide age bracket. That news is also compounded by the CDC issuing information on how far they believe it could be possible for the CCP virus to travel inside a confined space. It's currently estimated that people should sit approximately 1.8 meters apart. That is nearly 6 feet, give or take a slight margin of error, if you're using the backwards imperial system. Barring that, the concern here is that if you're any closer, there is a good chance that if somebody does have the CCP virus, you could be infected. The theory has been that, at least in general, if you are at least 1.8 meters away, the virus would disperse enough that the chances of you becoming infected diminish drastically. The concern is, what if you're in an environment that either doesn't allow for that or has a high concentration of people? In that situation, the CDC has admitted it is possible that 1.8 meters is not adequate. This is because with a lot of people who could possibly be spreading the virus building up in one location, the virus also builds up in the air. We're not talking about respiratory droplets here, which are quite large, but rather smaller, more particleized forms of it. And these hold up in the air, and then people would breathe these in. Situations in which this would be applicable include party atmospheres, some of which we've seen noted in the news recently, nightclubs where you have singing, dancing and shouting, sports activities, and similar where lots of noise, lots of people, and theoretically lots of possible risk of exposing others to the CCP virus. This yet again reinforces the reason why a mask is useful. Not necessarily perfect, the best method currently available to minimize the possible spread and contraction of the CCP virus. Going now from viral news to something interesting and more human-specific. It's been long understood in biology that human cells have to move and change shape in order to get through certain environments. Think of how the immune cells go from inside an artery, arteriole, or capillary into the local tissue. They have to do this to deal with infection from pathogens. The problem is the space that they get through is incredibly small and incredibly difficult. In order for them to be able to get there, they need to be able to move and shift, but that as a general idea has been very hard to visualize. It's not really practical to create a mock-up of the human body and watch these in real time. That's where this new news comes in. The researchers from the University of Strasbourg were able to catch video of just how the cells, specifically in this case fibroblasts, were able to get themselves through small spaces and move along a series of chambers. They did this using a variety of methods, but overall the big takeaway is how they got their nucleus, that is the part of the cell full of their DNA that needs to be carefully protected and housed, through these spaces that were smaller than the nucleus itself was. Somehow the fibroblasts were able to force the nucleus through, squashing it, but not destroying it or damaging it. One of the other interesting phenomena they noted was that these cells would generally move along a chemical gradient. In general terms, any chemical in an environment will move from an area of high concentration to low concentration, seeking equilibrium, that is the same concentration everywhere. Why then the cells are following a similar pattern of behavior is a point of interest. They also observed a series of other phenomena, such as the cells would not change direction without given a stimuli to do so, and would continue to travel in one direction. There were other phenomena they've noticed as well, which we won't go into here, but you may wish to read into it. Going from the cutting edge now to ancient history, archaeologists have just brought out yet another mummy from Egypt. This one is over 2,500 years old. The collection of over 50 mummies was found in an area south of Cairo, a ground that was used to bury them and part of a large necropolis. The find is important if for no other reason than finding them nowadays is quite difficult, due to grave robbing and other behaviours that have led to their destruction and loss over the last few centuries. The discovery of any well-preserved collection of mummies from Egypt is rare and difficult. These were buried in shafts at least 12 meters deep. While on one hand we can celebrate the rediscovery of ancient dead remains, we are confused and curious as to why there has been a mass loss of life in the coastal seas of Russia. There are thoughts that it might be related to pollution, climate change and more, when bodies of sea animals were found in the Kamchatka Peninsula. The number and nature of the dead animals is what's concerning here. Beached whales, small numbers of dead fish on the sea, similar issues of individual species are, if not common, as not as much of a concern. It's the large number and variety of creatures that are showing up that is the issue here. This led to investigation as to just what was happening, and the World Wildlife Foundation for Russia has come out with a belief that they may have some idea as to what was causing the large number of deaths, if not exactly what the thing itself is. They describe it as highly toxic, transparent substance that is highly soluble in water. This finding has led them to believe that it may be coming from a particular site called Koselsky. This is a particular place in Russia that has been used to store poisonous substances in deep underground sites since the 1970s. The site, although no longer used, is technically still full of these materials, and since there's no owner as such, there's no one responsible for maintaining it. This leads to certain concerns about how well the materials used to create it and the things stored within it have been maintained. If they have deteriorated, it is possible that at least some of the current events are related to that site. Much like with other news of late, hopefully we'll know more before long, and we'll have some idea as to what's happening. That's all the news we have for you this week. Thank you for watching. If you found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.